Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is just spend another minute just writing down the 3 things that you do well within your diet, things that you feel that you've got squared away nicely. And then the 3 things that, based on this information or information maybe that you already had, things that you need to improve. So it took me a minute there to write them down. Okay. Hope that everyone's had enough time there. So let's move on to now, which is an unfortunate part of anyone's sort of, let's say, fitness, athletic or professional sort of journey, which is the risk of injury, and what we can do nutritionally when we get injured, and what we can do nutritionally to try and prevent injuries from occurring. So obviously, unfortunately, they are unavoidable and they happen to athletes and recreational users and referees, and everyone is susceptible to an injury, and that's unavoidable, and it's a sad thing. What I'm really looking at here is terms of the long-term injury, the one that could take you out professionally, and why it might be important more to say someone who's a referee is, that's going to maybe take out some of your livelihood depending on the severity of the injury. Because these severe injuries can lead to immobilization, and if you're immobile, you can't do your job, and this immobilization also leads to loss of muscle mass and strength and function. So even when you've recovered from the injury, you might not be as fit, or you're most likely not to be not as fit as you were prior to an injury. Very busy slide that's just there for you to have a look at later. Obviously, this is being videoed, but basically, when you have an injury, there's a cascade of events and filter down, and basically they result in reduction in muscle size, muscle strength, and that performance. So it's quite a serious thing to have a sustained injury for a long period of time. But I'm sure I didn't need to explain that. But what are the consequences if your nutrition is bad? So I'm kind of sort of sound like, why should you have a good nutritional intake? Well, if you have a poor nutritional intake and you have a long-term injury, this can actually impede your recovery from that injury, particularly protein intake and energy malnutrition. So if these are both low, then it has a knock-on effect. These decrease certain rates of muscle protein synthesis, basically impede your healing. And any sort of nutritional intervention or your general diet when you're injured should look to attenuate these things. So in terms of what can we do from a nutrition side of things, there's a number of nutrients and nutrient strategies that have been proposed to improve recovery from injury. Again, it's pretty much like the diets, the fad diets. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of limited evidence. But in terms of the things that we know that work or we need to focus on are your overall energy intake and your intake of protein. Now, we'll go on to sleep in just a moment, but when we're looking at overall health and well-being, and when we're looking at training recovery, building muscle, improving adaptations, basically anything to do with athletic performance, these 3 things are the things that matter. So you've got the load, you've got the stimulus, whether that's lifting weights in the gym, whether that's running 10K, whether that's doing sprints up and down a track, that's your load, that's your stimulus that leads to adaptation. You have your sleep, which is where the majority of your recovery occurs, and if your recovery is poor, you're less likely to maximize those adaptations. And then the nutrition to basically fuel and recover from the training that you've done. So these are the important sort of, the essential sort of 3 things that you need to have. And when you're injured, you can't obviously load for that period of time. And it may be that your sleep is impacted because you're in pain, maybe it's your back, whatever. So the only thing that you might be able to control at that point is your nutrition. So again, this is more for you to have a look at post session if you want to, obviously, to take away. These are sort of the nutritional recommendations of what I would advise. I will go on to the supplementation side in just a second, but generally you're looking at protein intake, vegetable intake, where you're having your carbohydrate and how much. Then there's a number of supplements that can be used. Again, not essential, but these can help improve recovery from injury. Collagen is one. Creatine, I'm sure most people have heard of creatine, that helps improve increase of muscle mass. Omega-3s, now these can come from real food, whether it be oily fish or it can be from a supplementation. Perhaps for the vegan or the vegetarian athletes that don't want to, referees that don't want to take fish or fish oils, you can take the turmeric versions instead, and of course a multivitamin as well, just to help avoid any deficiencies. But obviously prevention is better than a cure. Now, obviously we can't do anything to prevent. Nutrition isn't magic. It's not going to prevent you from having that contact injury, and it's not going to actually prevent you from, if you're going to rupture an ACL because you twisted and your foot and your studs got caught in the grass or whatever, that's probably going to happen anyway. But in terms of what we can do nutritionally to prevent those injuries, avoid long periods of being in energy deficit. So if you've had too much you felt like you've gone for a period where you've eaten too much, or you haven't trained enough, or both, and then suddenly the competitive season's coming up and you've got to be in fit shape to referee those matches, and you go on a severe crash diet, that energy deficit can then contribute to injury. So it's advisable not to have these long periods of energy deficit. Again, inadequate protein content, vitamin D status, I think we've already spoken about, and also being regularly dehydrated when exercising can also contribute to injury. So always make sure you're hydrated. I'll go on to that in just a second. And then there's a couple of 3 nutrients to consider there as well.